Mr. Sun and the Halloween Ball by Solaris BlueRaven. Illustrations by Susan Shorter, available on Amazon.com. It was a moonlit evening. The trees were dancing through the twilight skies as the fireflies danced a fairy tale dream through the forest. The elves and garden divas were afoot bringing magic to flowers in late autumn bloom. The harvest was at hand, and the smell of pumpkin pie and spiced cider filled the air. A truly magical evening, thought Star Nightshadow, the local witch from a small town called Dragonsport. Star had just closed her potion shop for the night and was on her way home to her cottage to prepare for the annual Halloween ball. It was October, the month of magic and celebration. The witch's New Year, also known as Samhain, was right around the corner. To mortal folk, Samhain is also known as Halloween. The invitations were prepared by Wick and Arthur. They are two familiar cats of Star Nightshadow and the local caretakers of the yearly light festival at Dragonsport Cemetery. The Halloween ball invitations were all set. A specially coded invitation, all done in invisible ink, was written on each parchment. A paw print for authenticity was used. That was Wick's specialty, as he liked to paw paint with invisible ink. There was a scent of dragon's blood on the parchment and a fairy dust shimmer which could only be seen by magical eyes. Invitations to the whole town of Dragonsport went out. Fairies, pixies, spirits, gnomes, elves, witches, goblins, and even the old tree spirit down the road at the end of the forest. Miss Twilight Moon and Mr. Sun were also invited. The invitation read as this: Dear friends, it is with great pleasure we are once again celebrating the Halloween Ball at the Old Carriage House on Queens River Road, October 31st at 7 p.m. Please be in costume, RSVP if attending. Food and festivities provided. Yours, Miss Star Nightshadow. Miss Twilight Moon was one of the first to receive her invitation. After all, she was the evening eye in the sky. She had observed the delivery of the invitations on her nightly jaunt through the clouds. Following the route of the herald, the delivery gnome, she shadowed his move from home to home and mailbox to mailbox. Her moonlit beams were lighting the way. Miss Twilight Moon was illuminating the addresses so that Harold could see where he was going. The gnome looked up and said, Is that you, Miss Twilight? Why, yes, she replied. I should have known, said the gnome elf Harold. I felt a silvery mist on my back and knew there was someone friendly watching over me. Miss Moon smiled and said, Of course. Would I let you go alone on your delivery without a light from the moonlit skies? Why, no, said Harold. Harold replied, Since you are here, I have your invitation to the ball. I trust you will attend. Miss Moon smiled and said, When have I ever missed a Halloween ball? Harold the gnome smiled and went on his merry way, sending his farewells echoing down the road. See you at the ball, Miss Twilight. There was an address which was most difficult to deliver. It was for Mr. Sun. Harold thought to himself, How do I get this invitation to Mr. Sun? Miss Twilight Moon was tracking Harold through the clouds and overheard his rather loud thoughts. Miss Moon chimed in, saying, I will see to it Mr. Sun receives his invitation. I have a special friend who can deliver it should you like me to assist. At that point, a mist-like creature appeared through the clouds, forming the vapors of a bird. Yet the wings were much larger than any bird Harold had seen. What is it? Asked Harold. Miss Moon replied, It is a spirit and element of the air, Harold. It takes on many forms and grants wishes and requests to those in good standing with the spirit world. Harold cringed. I trust it likes me enough, Harold said. It does, replied Miss Moon. The spirit element of air then took the parchment from Harold's hands and vanished into the clouds. That was real magic, Harold cried out. Yes, it was, said Miss Moon. Harold once again thanked Miss Moon and went on down the road. His route was just about finished. He was ready to retire the evening with some spiced cider and apple cinnamon shortbread. The next day, as Mr. Sun rose, he noticed the parchment. The invitation was singed a bit, yet readable with the invisible ink. Mr. Sun was astounded. How can I attend a masquerade ball and wear a costume? Why, everyone would know it is me. What would I wear? What is that you say? His companion Twilight Moon replied. How do I attend this ball? With what costume? Let me see what we can find for you, replied Miss Moon. Miss Moon summoned the element of fire. The element rose forth like a miniature sun in the form of an orb. If you looked closely at the orb, you could see what appeared to be as a pixie fairy, violet in color, violet eyes, and green hair. The element smiled at Miss Moon and said, Why, Miss Twilight, as she was called. To what do I owe this pleasure? Miss Moon smiled and said, I would like your assistance with Mr. Sun's Halloween costume for the annual ball. Mr. Sun, replied the element, how can we find him a costume to wear? Miss Moon replied, Go to Miss Nightshadow's and see what she can find in her closet. You know, the one with all the ceremonial garb? Why, yes, I know the one, the element replied. I am on my way. On that, the elemental orb vanished beyond the speed of light. All that was seen was an orb soaring through the local neighborhoods, lighting homes across the way. Graceful and magical was the element of fire. The evening sky was shimmering in view as Miss Nightshadow sipped her herbal tea by the nightly fire. Her familiar companions, Wick and Arthur, were at her feet. She was just about to grab a book of grimoire when she noticed the orb enter her home. Who goes there? She asked. Why, it is me, said the element of fire. I have been sent by Miss Twilight to ask you for assistance with Mr. Sun's Halloween costume. Costume, Miss Night Shadow replied. How do you disguise the sun? She laughed. Well, we have to find something, replied the fire element. Her wings flew in and out of the fire as if dancing on a bed of rocks. Okay, Miss Night Shadow smiled and said, let's go upstairs to the magical closet and see what I can find. Miss Night Shadow's cats jumped in delight. The mere idea of rummaging in the closet brought joy to their hearts. The stair was spiraled with a blue mist echoing magical workings. There were potions along the windowsills, many of which appeared to be charging by Miss Twilight's mysterious glow. The spiral staircase appeared as if it would never end until finally they reached the top of the apex. To the left, a long hallway with some rather odd pictures of what appeared to be the history of Dragonsport magic on the wall. At the end of the hall, there was a lavender closet door with a golden knob. Curious, the element cried out. Is this it? The magic closet? Why, yes, smiled Miss Night Shadow. There was a pixie dust in the air, circulating around the closet and crystalline webs surrounding the knob as if to protect the closet from prying intruders. Miss Night Shadow used a verbal incantation and the door magically opened. What appeared as miniature stars flew out in a giddy array of bliss. Wicked Arthur rolled up on the carpet, playing with the garbs which were draped to the ground. I am sure we will find something in here, said the fire element. They looked. There were all sorts of garbs, costumes, cloaks, and props, none of which appeared to suit Mr. Sun's request. What about this? Cried the orb. She grabbed a mask made of gold, which appeared out of thin air. That is not much of a costume, Miss Night Shadow replied. What about this? Cried Arthur. What? Said the element of fire. I do not see anything. Miss Night Shadow smiled and motioned in the invisible air. Then out in thin air there appeared a silver sheet with 2 eyes cut out. What is that supposed to be? Cried the fire element. A ghost, said Miss Night Shadow. Why do you need to cover a ghost? The fire element cried out. Because, silly, so they can be seen and not spook anyone. Oh, said the fire element. I do not know if the sun would like to attend the ball as a ghost. After all, he is the sun. We shall see, replied Miss Night Shadow. She looked intently at the cloth, remembering the material was used for the invisibility purposes. This just might work, she said. She took the cloth out of her closet. The door gently closed behind her, fairy dust falling into the floor. It was getting late. The fire element, observing the darkening corridors, lit the candles for Miss Night Shadow as they all walked down the spiral staircase. Miss Night Shadow smiled in gratitude. With that, the element of fire smiled back and vanished into thin air with the invisible garb, saying, I will show this to Mr. Sun. Thank you, Miss Night Shadow, and good night. Good night, replied Miss Night Shadow. With that, Miss Night Shadow returned to her fireplace, sipping her tea. Her 2 companion friends at her feet warming themselves in a gentle purr. The peaceful night shimmered away to twilight morning. The next morning, the fire element was there bright and early to show Mr. Sun what she had found. Mr. Sun saw the garb and said, What is this? The fire element replied, Why, it is an invisibility cloak, used for ghost costumes. A ghost, replied Mr. Sun. He said, I do not know about that. Yet perhaps it may be fun to appear as one seeing, as I have never been to a Halloween ball before in costume. At that point, Miss Twilight Moon arrived and said, Splendid! You have a costume for the ball. How exciting. May I see it? She asked. No, smiled Mr. Sun. It is a surprise. All right, then, replied Miss Moon. Knowing well what Mr. Sun's costume was, yet not wishing to spoil his fun, she winked at the fire element. At that point, the fire element winked back and said, My work is done here. Thank you, replied Miss Moon, and the fire element vanished with echoing laughter, saying, See you at the ball. Time was indeed flying off the wall. All Hallows Eve had arrived. The elements were celebrating with orbs and waterfalls, fantastic winds, and an autumn chill that would warm the spirit. The elves and gnomes had gone to town at the carriage house. Never had there been such an elaborate decor in all the history of the town gatherings. There were pumpkins aglow and candles lit throughout the path leading to the carriage house. Orbs maintained their stations in celebration of a grand entrance to guests. Wick and Arthur were at the entrance to greet the masked guests and hand out party favors. There was even Mr. Spooky, the house caretaker, and Elder Cat, taking coats and inviting all in for some pumpkin bread and spiced cider. The kitchen was indeed the hearth of the home, filled with fairies, gnomes, elves, and pixies. All were sharing their magical recipes and tinctures. The smell of spices filled the air, and there was lots of sweetbread that no nature spirit could resist. The local witches had arrived in their best cloaks and circlets, masks, and guises, sharing spells, potions, and conversing with many ancestors long departed, visiting for a short while on All Hallows Eve to share a recipe or two. It was a blissful event. Miss Twilight Moon arrived at the sun, and as the sun, all were astounded to see her in a brilliant light shining on all attendees. Why, Miss Twilight, you look lovely, Miss Night Shadow said. Miss Moon smiled back and said, It did not take you long to figure me out. Why, no, replied Miss Night Shadow. Your moonbeams give you away, and the water from my goblet shimmered silver when you moved by. Miss Moon replied, somewhat embarrassed, I see. Just then an ominous presence appeared. At first it appeared as a shimmer of light, then it vanished. There was a warm presence as it moved by. What was that? Said the gnome herald. Why, I believe that was Mr. Sun, replied Miss Night Shadow. I loaned him one of my costumes from the magical closet. Would that be the invisible ghost garb? Replied Harold. Why, yes, replied Miss Night Shadow. Just then a pixie chimed in and said, I thought the ghost costume left a chill in the air. "The ghosts do," replied Miss Night Shadow, "but that is Mr. Sun in the costume. He radiates heat." "That's right," said the pixie. They all smiled at Mr. Sun as he moved by. There was music playing in the form of an autumn dance. The leaves on the trees danced to a rhythm in circular motion. This was a Halloween favorite for all of the attendees. A great circle was cast in light and magic, and the celebration began. There were visitors, nature spirits, village ghosts, stopping in to say hello and leaving a message or two on the invisible wall for those inclined to read them. There was even the old gold sniffer ghost named Ryder, who arrived to give his yearly ghost story, Message of Gold, and where the gnomes might look to find it if they dare. At a distance, the old carriage house was aglow. Inside, luminescent beings were seen in shadow and silhouette. The old tree spirit arrived and shared stories with the children of the forest and the magic which lives in every rock and stream. Mr. Sun's costume was a success. At the end of the evening, the attendees all turned to Mr. Sun and said, "Mr. Sun, seeing as we know it is you, will you honor us with the warming of our moonlit bonfire?" Mr. Sun smiled in excitement, ripped off his cloak, and shined his warm sun on all the gathered, lighting the gentle blaze into dawn. A magical night it was, a happy Halloween and New Year. With that, Miss Night Shadow said, "Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again, and blessed be." "Blessed be," replied the attendees. "The circle is open, yet never broken." The end.